All right, well, it's been a while. Welcome to the Freedom to Draw Unsolved Mysteries. I am your host, John. I hope everybody had a happy holidays. But now that we're in the month of January, it is Stalker Awareness Month. And I just thought it was poignant at this moment to remind everybody what a stalker is. A stalker is not romantic. A stalker is not a joke. It's when it happens to you. Hopefully it never happens to you, but if it happens to you, you're not going to be laughing about it. It is defined as a person who harasses or persecutes someone with unwanted and obsessive attention. Now, this also brings light to the current Idaho murder. I believe that guy was a stalker. And it also inspired me to think, hey, what is this guy, the Idaho murderer guy, what is he thinking? And he seems to be a copycat of Ted Bundy. So then that got me thinking, it's Stalker Awareness Month, and the most dangerous stalkers are serial killers. So we're going to start drawing some of the most infamous serial killers on this month of Stalker Awareness Month, because they, by definition, are the most dangerous stalkers on Earth. So we got a guy by the name of Richard Ramirez we're going to do today. And I'm also going to tell you a little bit about his story. The twisted tale of Richard Ramirez. You can see his eyes are almost black. The Night Stalker, serial killer who terrorized the 1980s in California. Born Ricardo Leyva Muñoz Ramirez, serial killer Richard Ramirez became infamous as the Night Stalker after killing 13 people between 1984 and 1985. We're going to draw him. We're going to tell you about his twisted tale on this Stalker Awareness Month. On August 31st, 1985, serial killer Richard Ramirez walked into a convenience store in LA. At first, the man, known as the Night Stalker, seemed like an ordinary shopper, but then he noticed his own face on the cover of a newspaper, and he ran for safety. By this point, Richard Ramirez was already considered the main suspect in the brutal Night Stalker murders that had terrorized California for over a year, but authorities had only just released his name and picture to the public. He's got black eyes, guys. They're black. And we want to make sure we get that. No remorse. You stare into these eyes and they're just black. This gave residents plenty of time to memorize his physical features and point him out to authorities as he dashed out of the store. It also gave Ramirez very little chance to get away, but of course he still did try to escape. The ensuing chase involved 7 police cars and a helicopter that tracked Ramirez through the city, but an angry mob of bystanders caught up to him first. Enraged by his heinous crimes, they began to beat him relentlessly. At least one man used a metal pipe. By the time the police arrived, Ramirez was practically thanking them for arresting him. The ensuing chase involved 7 police cars and a helicopter. The Night Stalker had began his brutal killing spree a little over a year before this arrest. In that time, Ramirez murdered at least 14 people and committed countless other violent acts, but his life of crime started long before that. Ramirez's traumatic childhood. Born on February 29, 1960, Ramirez was raised in El Paso, Texas. Ramirez claimed that his father physically abused him and that he sustained multiple head injuries at an early age. One injury was so severe that it reportedly caused him to have epileptic seizures. This is common when you study the serial killer. They do have a history of childhood abuse and head trauma. Now, what they say is that the head trauma disrupts the part of the brain that lets you feel remorse and culpability for your actions, and they seem to have they have it, but it seems to be diminished in serial killers' brains. To escape his violent father, Ramirez spent a lot of his time with his older cousin Miguel, who was a Vietnam veteran. Unfortunately, Miguel's influence wasn't that much better than his father's had been. During his time in Vietnam, Miguel had raped, tortured, and even dismembered several Vietnamese women, and sickeningly he had the photographic evidence to prove it. He often showed little Richie photos of the horrors he inflicted upon these women. Right there, that's what a role model, huh? This is just ridiculous for this man to be even showing a little kid this kind of stuff. What is wrong with that guy? But I think a serial killer is the product of his environment and his heredity. It's a mixture of both, I believe. And that is my opinion. And when Ramirez was just 13 years old, he witnessed his cousin fatally shoot his own wife. Shortly after the shooting, Ramirez began to transform from scared, abused boy to hardened, sullen young man. This guy was definitely a sick individual. Look at his eyebrows. From developing an interest in Satanism to becoming addicted to drugs, Ramirez's life took on a dark turn. Even worse, he was still under his cousin's influence, since Miguel had been found not guilty of the murder by reason of insanity. Miguel ultimately spent just 4 years in a mental hospital until he was released. Before long, Ramirez developed an obsession with the same kinds of sexual and physical violence as Miguel. That's really surprising. And Miguel had inflicted on the women in these photos that you saw. Ramirez also began to have more run-ins with the law, especially after he moved to LA area in California. Though most of his early crimes in the late 70s and early 80s were related to theft and drug possession, it would be a matter of time before they escalated to unspeakable violence. The brutal crimes of Richard Ramirez. This is a mug shot of when he was arrested. He's almost kind of laughing. Very arrogant pose, if you ask me. When anybody normally would be shitting bricks when they got arrested, he is arrogantly posing. Pardon my French. But, you know, this guy just sickens you. For a long time, Ramirez's first murder was believed to have taken place on June 28, 1984. It was then that he killed a 79-year-old Jeannie Vincal. Not only did Ramirez stab and sexually assault his victim, he also slashed her throat so deeply that he almost decapitated her. But decades after Ramirez's first arrest in '85, he was also linked by DNA evidence to the murder of a 9-year-old girl, which took place on April 10th, 1984. Months before the Vincal murder, so that may well have been his first killing. So they think not the old lady was the first one, it might have been this 9-year-old girl, which is, both acts are just despicable and heinous. Unless there were more that happened before that. After the Vincal murder, it would be several months before Richard Ramirez struck again, but when he did, he pursued his depraved impulses with a horrific dedication. Sick individual. On March 17, 1985, Ramirez's murder spree began in earnest with an assault on Maria Hernandez in her home. Though Hernandez managed to escape, her roommate Daryl Okazaki was not so lucky. That evening, Okazaki became another one of Ramirez's murder victims. But Ramirez still wasn't done. Later that same night, he shot and killed another victim, Tsai Lian Yu. I mean, this guy just has a sick obsession. I mean, he's obviously stalking these victims. This is the definition of a stalker. It is not a joke. It's not romantic. When someone stalks you, it is very invading, and it's just indescribable. I thank God I was never stalked, so I don't have first-hand knowledge of it, but the way it gets used in the popular vernacular this day and age, I think it should be looked at as more serious and not quite like a joke. A little over a week later, Ramirez murdered another 64-year-old Vincent Zazara and his 44-year-old wife, Maxine. Sickeningly, it was then that Ramirez began to establish his signature attack style: shoot and kill the husband, then assault and stab the wife. But his murder of Maxine was especially ghastly, as he gouged out her eyes. For months, Ramirez would continue to stalk and murder more victims in California, striking fear in the hearts of people throughout the state. His reign of terror continues. Richard Ramirez's reign of terror continues. One of the most terrifying things about Richard Ramirez was that he was willing to kill just about anyone who crossed his path. Unlike some other serial killers who have a type, Ramirez murdered both men and women, preyed on victims young and old. At first it seemed like Ramirez was only attacking people near LA, but he soon claimed a couple of victims near San Francisco as well. And since the press dubbed him the Night Stalker, it was clear that most of his crimes happened at night, adding yet another scary element. Disturbingly, many attacks included a satanic element as well. In some cases, Ramirez would carve pentagrams into his victim bodies, and in other cases he would force victims to swear their love for Satan. This guy is really sick and disturbing, guys. Now, you should be repulsed by a lot of these things, unless you're like the Idaho murderer, where you're actually looking up to this guy, which is even more sicker, if you ask me. Disturbingly, many of us all over California, people went to bed fearing the Night Stalker would break into their homes while they slept and perform unspeakable rituals of rape, torture, and murder. Since he apparently attacked at random, it truly seemed like no one was safe. The LAPD increased their presence on the street and even created a special task force just to find him, with the FBI lending a hand. Meanwhile, the public anxiety was so intense around this time that there was a noticeable surge in sales of guns, lock installations, burglar alarms, and attack dogs. But ultimately, in 1985, in August, Richard Ramirez's own mistakes would eventually lead to his capture. After he was spotted outside a witness's home, he accidentally left a footprint behind, and he also left his car and license plate in plain sight. When the police tracked down the vehicle, they were able to find just enough of a fingerprint to make a match. By that point, they had already received tips that someone with the last name of Ramirez was involved. Sure enough, The LAPD was able to identify Ramirez thanks to their new computer database of fingerprints. And even though the records only included criminals who were born after 1960, it just so happened that Ramirez was born in 1960. Disgusting individual. Authorities soon found Ramirez's mugshots from his prior arrests. And one of his surviving victims came forward with a detailed description that was quite similar to the photos. By the end of August 1985, police decided to release the Night Stalker's image and name. Though they initially worried that this would give Ramirez a chance to escape, it turned out that he was blissfully unaware of his newfound publicity until it was too late. The capture of the Night Stalker. By pure happenstance, Richard Ramirez was traveling back to LA when his photo was released, so he didn't realize that he had been tracked down until he was back in the city and he saw his own face on the newspapers. And this guy was a narcissist, no doubt about it. He loved the attention. Once he figured out he was getting it, and on his trial he was very arrogant and kind of used that time on TV to just say outlandish things and act outlandishly. Though he attempted to flee police and tried to steal a car in the process, he was tracked down by a vigilante mob that recognized him, in part due to Ramirez's noticeably bad teeth. They beat him up until the police finally closed in. After his arrest, Ramirez was found guilty on 13 counts of murders. In addition to the murder charges, authorities also found him responsible for committing several rapes, assaults, and burglaries. Ramirez was sentenced to death in the gas chamber for his crimes, and he smiled in response. The Night Stalker later said, "I am beyond good and evil. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells in us all. That's it." He was held in San Quentin State Prison for the rest of his life, but he was never put to death due to the complicated nature of this case, which included a 50,000-page trial record. The state Supreme Court wasn't able to hear his appeal until 2006. And even though the court rejected his claims, additional appeals would have taken several more years. During his extended delay, Richard Ramirez met a female admirer named Doreen Leoy, who had struck up a correspondence with him, and in 1996, he married her while he was on death row. "He's kind, he's funny, he's charming," Leoy said 1 year later. "I think he's really a great person. He's my best friend. He's my buddy." That lady needs to be checked into a psych ward, if you ask me. Obviously, most people did not share her feelings for the countless Californians who lived in terror during the mid-1980s. Ramirez was little better than the devil he worshipped. It's just evil. It's just pure evil, said Pete Zazzara, the son of victim Vincent Zazzara, in 2006. I don't know why somebody would want to do something like that, to take joy in what had happened. Ultimately, Richard Ramirez died of complications from B-cell lymphoma, a cancer of the lymphatic system, in 2013, and he was 53 years old. While he was alive, the Night Stalker never expressed any remorse for his crimes. In fact, he often appeared to take pleasure in his infamy. Hey, big deal, he said shortly after getting the death sentence. Death always comes with territory. I'll see you in Disneyland, he said. And that just gives you a small sample of what kind of mal-thinking was going on inside of that disgusting head of his as I draw it. These people just make you sick, but people should know about it because knowledge is power. You know, you don't want to end up ever in a situation like this guy. You want to keep your doors locked. And he was the ultimate stalker. So, yeah, Stalker Awareness Month. This is Richard Ramirez. He was known as the Night Stalker, guys. This is John Krupa, leader of the Freedom to Draw Caricatures and the Freedom to Draw Unsolved Mysteries. Peace out.